Thanks everyone for joining this for our third call. So what I'm going to do is that I would like to present you as the usual ceremony of our quarterly calls, the activities of our interest group, and then quickly we go to the topic of interest today, which is the presentation by our guest speakers. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, Masood.
Not yet.
But until you bring the presentation on board, maybe I mentioned to everyone that Bryce was kind enough. You can see that you are all in normal Zoom rather than just listen-only mode, because we think it's important for this type of meeting, rather than other presentations, that we turn into a more active participation round. So we hope that you will unmute when we have time for questions and you will enter discussion, because that's quite important for us. So yeah, if on the other hand, for whatever reason, you're not comfortable turning on the camera or switching on the microphone, please just use the chat function and we can collect input from there. Thanks, Masood. You can see your screen now. It's still a QVM, not the PowerPoint.
Yes. I think you should be able to see this right now. Is that okay? Everyone sees
Perfect. Yes, please start.
Screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I would like to just go very briefly through the introduction of our interest group. Here's the team currently. My name is Masood Tusi. I'm the chair of this interest group, and I have the joy and the honor to work with this fantastic team that we have. And I'm a medical doctor and pharmacoepidemiologist, and I'm working for IQVIA. And I invite my colleagues to present yourself. I don't see your cameras anyway, so please go ahead and present yourself.
Hello, I am Dimitra Lingri. Hello, I'm Dimitra Lingri. I'm co-chairing. Sorry, I had trouble with my phone, with my microphone. I'm co-chairing this group together with Elena Pitelos. I have a legal background, and I'm very happy to be a part of this team.
Hello, so I'm Elena Pitelos. I am indeed Dimitri's co-chair. My background is biomedical. I'm transitioning from oncology to R&D and to lots of things to do with clinical evidence documentation and HRA. And I'll pass the ball to Jota because Lorena is unfortunately not able to join us today. So Jota.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our workshop. I'm Jota Kopsiafti. I support the team as a project manager. In my everyday life, I work as a senior clinical research specialist at Medtronic. I'm a biomedical scientist by training and have transitioned into epidemiology and clinical studies.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So our interest group has been established in 2019, and we have the mission, we defined as our mission, to help changing the dynamics regarding real-world evidence and the artificial intelligence generation, in terms of generation, appraisal, of the evidence through these methods, and also their use in HTA. Our objectives is to provide a network for education, communication, collaboration, and thought leadership among our members. One of the most important remits that you're looking here is actually the sense of belongingness. So by joining this interest group, you will feel that you are belonging to a team and a group who's talking about the topics that are in your area of interest, because HTA is a very vast area, and it's very difficult to to master all of the topics which are happening there, and that's why these interest groups exist. And so the first aspect is having a forum and catalyst for change, sense of belongingness. The second one is providing education, and the last one is also capacity building by providing you and helping you find resources and tools for your projects. So With this being said, in terms of activities, we have a number of activities, and this special effect is thanks to Elena, if you have noticed it. So in terms of activities, we have the virtual annual meeting, and the other activities, actually, as you can see, that we have received a lot of very positive and encouraging testimonials. We had the first screen was out. Yeah, we had our first and second quarterly meetings, which have been already held. The first one was in spring, presented by Ashley Jackson, and it was about building HTA prayer real-world evidence standards. Very well attendance and very appreciated by our audience. The second happened in earlier summer, this summer. It was in July and presented by Americo Cicchetti and Sin Dahlberg about a specific project on AI and dementia, and it was also a very interesting topic, and we received very positive feedback about this presentation. So our third presentation is today, and it's our honor to welcome Pooya Gurayli and Golnar Karimian for the presentation that they have on the artificial intelligence in outcomes research and the ethical issues of application of artificial intelligence in healthcare. So I would like to invite Pooya, if you want to present yourself, please. You're on mute.
Masood, maybe I
Yes.
say a few things about Pooya.
Yes,
in
please.
general. Yes. Okay. Also, if somebody can continue admitting people as they come. So as a lot of you joined after we started, we wanted to say that we changed the format, and we thank Bryce for accommodating us, because we want everybody to be able to unmute, have camera turn on. So we want this to be more interactive, because this is a meeting. It's not an educational activity per se. It's not a webinar. So we want to make things more interactive. That's one. The second one is because we've seen a lot of participation. We had events with hundreds of people registering, even in the summer, which was very surprising for us. So we're trying to make everything that we have held as a meeting available in YouTube within reasonable time. So today's meeting, for example, will be on YouTube in a not weeks, in a couple of months' time, probably around 3 to 4 months, but the rest is already there. So you can see there. And we also are trying to have monthly communication meetings from Lorena, who is not able to be with us today, and the newsletter, which we held back from the annual meeting and for the summer vacation. So if you're not receiving this, drop us a line. So go back to today's meeting is entirely artificial intelligence, but quite divergent. So Pooya is a principal consultant from Quality HTA. She's a physician, she's an MD, but also she's an MB and an MPH, and she has worked for the past over 10 years, I think of 12 years, yeah, I think we have it written. She has worked across the globe, both for firms and for the private sector and for the public sector, and presented her work across different forums, from the CAT Symposium to RSNA and ARCC. And we are very happy that she agreed to present her work, because it's one of the first quite good and comprehensive systematic reviews in the field of AI, touching upon HTA. The review is published, or most of the review is published, but the focus today will be on outcomes research and artificial intelligence, so a little bit more broader, if you like, than just HTA per se. So Pooya, thanks.
Hello. The honor is absolutely mine, Masood. Thanks for the introduction, Elena. My name is Pooya Gurayli, the Principal Consultant at Quality HTA, and this presentation, Artificial Intelligence in Outcomes Research, is based on our publication in 2021 called Artificial Intelligence in Outcomes Research, a Systematic Scoping Review. Considering that this research was a collaborative work, it would be more ethical to mention the names of the fantastic co-authors of this paper very quickly. Mr. Luciano Irachi from Ontario Health, Dr. Nazanin Hossain Khan from Vilite Now, Dr. Mary Arjan Katawala from Ontario Bioscience Organization Now. Since Elena has kindly introduced me, I just go over a few things in my background very quickly. I'm an MD, MBE, MPH in health economics and health promotion with over 12 years experience on over 70 pharmaceutical, medical device, and research projects within governmental organizations, including Cancer Care Ontario, pharmaceutical companies including GSK and Roche, consulting firms, and research centers in 3 continents. This presentation includes a short introduction about our objective and research methods, our findings, and finally the conclusion. Outcomes research is the cornerstone of health technology assessment, or HTA, and decision makers in many jurisdictions rely on it to inform adoption of new health technology. However, we know that generating outcomes is time-consuming and delays the adoption of new technologies. Now, artificial intelligence claims to have the potential to accelerate and contribute additional accuracy and quality to the evidence base and maybe facilitate the decision-making processes. What is AI? AI has several definitions. One of those definitions is the intelligence demonstrated by machine that mimics human intelligence, such as reasoning, recognition, problem solving, and decision making. Variety types of AI algorithms are increasingly used in medicine, but it's likely that some areas are further ahead than others, and the types of algorithms used vary across specialties. Machines might be better, more efficient, and faster than human when we have lots of scenarios and variables, but we need to be clear about the usage and values of each algorithm. While there had been some systematic reviews of how AI is being used in some areas of medicine, to date that we started our research, there had been no systematic reviews of the scope of AI methods used in outcomes research. So we decided to systematically capture the scope of AI methods used in outcomes research studies to inform decision makers and broaden perspectives for health technology adoption. To reach our goal, we conducted a systematic literature search on these 3 databases. After defining the PICO, study type and time, we excluded studies related to diagnostics or screening outcomes, public health, education, behavioral interventions, robotics, wearable sensors, dental interventions, or using cost as the primary outcome. The most important data we extracted were the therapeutic area, the primary health outcome, the health intervention, the AI algorithm, the primary reason of using AI, and the year of study and publication. To run the analysis, we categorize these data by looking at ICD-11 for the therapeutic areas, grouped the primary outcomes as morbidity, mortality, or both. Morbidity outcomes were categorized in safety, efficacy, effectiveness, and general well-being. Medical interventions were either drugs, medical devices, surgical methods, mixed, or other. And we grouped the primary reason of using AI into prediction, classification, and clustering. But about AI algorithms, it was really challenging to find a standard framework and a reliable, comprehensive source to categorize AI models for our goal. Looking at different sources, finally we grouped AI algorithms into neural networks, natural language processing, and machine learning algorithms using this framework, mixed and other groups. Speaking of challenges, for example, we decided to group general neural networks and deep learning separately as per this framework, despite their mutual reliance on underlying neural networks algorithms. We identified 2,219 potentially relevant articles in July 2019. After removing duplicates and considering our inclusion-exclusion criteria, we ended in 370 studies. We found that AI was mainly used in 84% for prediction prognosis, followed by 13% outcomes classification and 2% for clustering. Of those studies used AI for prediction, 68% had modeled morbidity, 23% mortality, and 8% both outcomes. Among morbidity outcomes using AI for prediction prognosis, 90% of these studies measured efficacy effectiveness, 7% safety, and 3% measured general well-being. Considering the importance of both groups of effectiveness and safety to HTA and regulatory bodies, seeing more reported effectiveness than safety outcomes can be a little surprising. But this could be because of several reasons, like, for example, the population size in phase 3 trials is larger compared with phase 1, which targets the safety of interventions, requiring longer follow-up periods to observe some safety outcomes. Publication bias towards positive effectiveness findings, and or maybe because of our focus on primary outcomes, which are more likely effectiveness outcomes than safety one. Among the effectiveness studies using AI for prediction prognosis, 78% disease control were the dominant subcategory. This could be due to the incurable nature of non-communicable disease and their higher prevalence compared with communicable one. Considering that this review was conducted just before the pandemic, however, we should keep in mind, as long as we have no option to cure COVID-19 patients, disease control might remain dominant in the future studies as well. Analyzing AI algorithms and outcomes variables, we found neural networks with 30% and mixed with 28% were the most frequently employed algorithms. 57% of all the studies which measured morbidity outcomes used mixed and neural networks algorithms. Neural networks was the main algorithm used for modeling of 40% mortality and 30% of both categories. As the chart shows, 34% of the studies used AI were on neoplasms, followed by almost 12% nervous system and 11.6% mental disorders. Also, 35% of studies used AI for prediction were on neoplasms, 12% on mental, and 11% on nervous system disorders. Among these groups of disease neural networks in neoplasms and mixed in the two other groups were the most frequently used algorithms, while there were no AI studies in therapeutic areas such as metabolic and circulatory system disorders proportionate to the number of patients and marketed technologies. This could be because of focus of pharma industry on the neoplasm products in the last 10 years. Also, the predictor power of AI models is more required in neoplasm due to the complexity of prediction and prognosis of patients' outcomes in this therapeutic area. Using AI for clustering was seen only in a few therapeutic areas, including neoplasms, circulatory, respiratory, and musculoskeletal system disorders. And this can be an interesting topic for the future research to see if there is any meaningful reason or correlation between these therapeutic areas and using AI for clustering. Artificial intelligence was predominantly found in studies which utilize drugs, followed by surgical methods and medical devices. This might be, again, because of the corresponding potential for commercialization and more availability of resources to produce studies on drug interventions and outcomes, or maybe the rigorous approval standards of regulatory bodies for drug compared with for other interventions. As you see, neural networks and then mixed groups were the most frequently used algorithms tested in studies with surgical methods. But mixed algorithms were in the first ranking among the studies with the rest of interventions. Support vector machine algorithm was also employed in all types of studies, regardless of the type of intervention. We divided the time period into 4-year groups. Of studies used AI algorithms, 30% were conducted between 2016 and 2019. In this time period, the frequently used AI algorithms were 37% mixed and 24% ensemble, followed by 12% neural networks. This decline in the trend of using neural networks after the period between 2008 and 2011 might be because of the emerging diversity of other machine learning techniques such as deep learning and or greater familiarity with AI algorithms to use the mixture of algorithms. Or improved knowledge and proficiency among researchers and clinical experts to use mixture of algorithms, and or having access to larger data sets and high performance computing facilities. And finally, the take-home message of this webinar. There is great potential for using AI algorithm to inform the evidence base for decision-making processes, but still we have certain gaps in AI applications across therapeutic areas. Considering the crucial role of measured outcomes on the HTA decisions, still more work is needed to develop some standards of the various AI applications before incorporating AI usage into prediction, classification, and clustering of outcomes, and use those in the HTA decision-making processes. These are the sources for this presentation and our article as the last reference with the link if you would be interested in the details of this study and co-authors. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. My email address in case.
Maybe we group questions and discussions for after Golnar presents. So maybe without sharing screen, I say a couple of things for Golnar. So we're very lucky to have Golnar in Maastricht, and Golnar is a physician specializing. She actually is wrapping up at the moment her specialty in gastroenterology and hepatology. And we're also lucky because she had completed her PhD before she did her master's, so she's a pretty independent researcher, I think. So Golnar is transitioning at the moment. She's wrapped up her master's and part of the work she's going to be presenting on AI and ethics is her thesis for her MSc in public health in Maastricht. Golnar, it's on to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Elena, for your introduction and for the opportunity to present this work. Indeed, I am finishing my residency in gastroenterology and hepatology, and I did this work as a part of my master in the past 2 years. I'm going to now share my screen. I am going to present our scoping review, which is submitted recently on ethical issues of application of artificial intelligence in healthcare. As Puya very nicely presented just now, artificial intelligence and applications in healthcare are increasing rapidly, but there are several issues that are needed to be addressed. To our best knowledge, there is still no universally accepted framework to inform the development and implementation of AI-based technology in healthcare. And very importantly, ethical issues regarding AI technology in healthcare remain largely unaddressed. These issues are consisting of biases due to, for example, inadequate or poor testing databases for developing AI algorithms, the issues of patient privacy, how to best gain the trust of patients and clinicians, and also very importantly, how to best communicate the level of uncertainties about the AI in healthcare with the users and practitioners. Therefore, it is very important to develop a trustworthy AI to overcome the ethical issues of AI in healthcare and gain the trust of the users. In Europe, there have been several movements already ongoing towards the development of trustworthy AI. You're all familiar with the legislative frameworks on the key aspects such as data protection, which has led to GDPR and a unified approach across the European Union about how the data is best handled. There was also the call of European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies that called for a process to pave a way toward developing a common and internationally recognized ethical and legal framework. This EGE statement proposed a set of fundamental ethical principles based on the values that are accepted in the European Union. This led to finally the call of the European Commission, which published a set of non-binding ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. The core emphasis in this guidelines was that EU must develop a human-centric approach to AI that is in line with the European values and principles. This led to the development of the ethics guidelines for a trustworthy AI, which is a non-binding framework presented by high-level expert groups on artificial intelligence. And this is the base of our work in this ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. One of the 3 components to achieve trustworthy AI is adherence to ethical principles, and these principles are respect for human autonomy, prevention of harm, fairness, and explicability. The guideline also emphasizes on the importance of engaging with the vulnerable groups, a thorough risk assessment of AI systems, and also how to adopt and mitigate when there is a risk upon developing an AI method. The protection of privacy is also one of the important aspects of a trustworthy AI. Drawing up on this ethical guideline, in our review, we aimed to identify the ethical issues of AI application in healthcare and highlight the gaps in evidence, and also try to propose steps to move towards an evidence-informed approach for addressing ethical issues of AI. We searched for peer-reviewed articles that examine the ethical aspects of AI in healthcare in Medline and Embase in the past 10 years. The last date of our search was in July 2020. For this search strategy, we used a combination of different terms for artificial intelligence, machine learning, or deep learning, and combination with ethics or bioethics. This search strategy yielded about 2,000 articles, something more than 2,000 articles. Then we followed through with following a Prisma flowchart to identify, screen, and select eligible articles according to our inclusion criteria for full text examination and eventually data charting. Our inclusion criteria was one was the topic of the article that had to be about AI and different types of it. The topic should have been the application of AI for humans in healthcare. As you know, there were also a lot of articles which were about AI for diagnostic or in animal models or molecular biology, but this was focused only on humans in healthcare. We considered all the primary and secondary research type with the qualitative or quantitative methods for our scoping review, and we only selected the articles which were in English. After removing the duplicates, we ended up about something about 1,700 articles for title and abstract screening, and after excluding the several of the articles based on our inclusion-exclusion criteria, we screened and assessed full text articles of about 200 articles. From there, 18 articles were selected for the data charting. Data was extracted from the articles in the forms of phrases that match these ethical concepts that are listed here, or they had a concept related to them. We also extracted additional data on the study-specific characteristics and on whether there was a practical idea or tool presented in the study evaluating the adherence to the ethical principles. We also extracted data regarding stakeholder opinions, and usually these stakeholders were participants of these studies. Here is the list of the 18 articles that we included here for data charting. It is important to mention that the key ethical principles were largely absent in design or the deployment of many articles. That's why from the 1,700 articles that in the beginning we started to go through, only 18 articles were included for data charting. Most of these studies were in the recent years, and they had a qualitative research approach, and the setting of the studies as well as the participants of the studies were quite heterogeneous. This is a map of outcomes that are ethical principles measured by the number of studies in the scoping review. Looking at the application of AI in healthcare, the principles of human autonomy, patient privacy, and explicability were the most frequent studied ethical aspects. Fairness and prevention of harm were less frequently studied, but I come back to that later. Looking at the concerns regarding the principle of human autonomy, lack of patient-centeredness, lack of shared decision-making, and potential to ignore individual preferences were one of the some of the most important concerns that were mentioned in the literature. As an AI tool or algorithm may have been based on limited epidemiologic evidence and may not correspond to the specific population characteristics in another setting. Therefore, the results of that might not be matching another individual patient's needs or wishes and preferences. And that will, of course, undermine his ability to his right to human autonomy. And that will be in opposite of this principle. The black box issue referring to the complexity of the algorithms was considered one of the major roadblocks in the comprehensive communication between the healthcare providers and patients. And it was an issue which was mentioned by many healthcare providers as one of the reasons why they can hardly trust AI decision support systems. The principle of patient privacy was 50% of the articles were somehow discussing the patient privacy. It was obvious that different regulations for protection of privacy and confidentiality of health information are being used across the globe. Some authors called for new models about how to control the data and how to protect patient privacy by engaging patients as co-managers of their data and of the processing to which their information is channeled. This would lead to meaningful individual control of the data. However, this would require and assume that the patients have a certain level of health literacy, a certain level of information technology literacy to be able to perform as co-managers of their data. And interestingly, the opinion of some of the stakeholders is different than what we might think as regulators or policymakers. For example, in one study in which meningioma patients were approached and asked about their opinion of patient privacy, they thought loss of patient privacy was a very acceptable sacrifice for the greater good of having a better health outcome. Principle of fairness was studied across various types of AI technology, including AI-driven clinical decision support system, prediction models, embodied AI, and machine learning algorithms in, for example, medical diagnosis. In these studies, it was suggested that bias in development phase of algorithms could lead to discrimination, lack of diversity inclusion, and lack of just provision of care. An embedded unconscious bias in clinical decision support system could lead to unfair care of patients on unfair predictions based on certain elements. For example, in a retrospective cohort study, the authors tested 2 AI prediction models retrospectively in 2 independent cohort data, one in a psychiatric unit and another one in an intensive care unit. And the aim of their study was to investigate whether any ethical issue would rise if these prediction models were applied. Their study showed that when the AI model was used to predict the rate of readmission in the psychiatric unit or mortality and readmission in intensive care unit, there was a significant difference when race, gender, or the type of patient insurance policy was included. Therefore, the development of discrimination conscious algorithms was suggested to be beneficial in reducing bias and prejudices in healthcare. When looking at the evidence regarding stakeholders' opinions about the ethical issues of AI application in healthcare, we noticed that several things are missing. First of all, only 2 articles were exploring the opinions of patients. Vulnerable groups such as disabled patients were largely underrepresented. Some patients had a very accepting opinion about the possibility of errors or loss of privacy for their greater good. This might be very different than what we as regulators or as opinion holders think about developing a trustworthy AI. 5 articles focused on the opinions of the healthcare providers, mainly primary care in the primary care healthcare, and 1 article focused on health informatics managers. Looking at the evidence regarding practical methods for evaluating adherence to ethical principles, we noticed that only 2 studies presented some practical methods for AI developers to preserve patient privacy, and we didn't come across any study showing any practical tool for preserving of other principles. So to summarize, in this scoping review, we could show that the principles of fairness, preservation of human autonomy, and explicability and patient privacy were equally the most frequent ethical aspects that were discussed. However, the principle of prevention of harm was the least researched issue. Practical methods or frameworks for testing the adherence of AI to the ethical principles were largely missing. There is a gap in the current evidence about stakeholder perspectives on the issues of AI and ethics, as only a limited number of patient groups and care providers were approached. And some stakeholders, such as regulatory authorities, healthcare facility managers, AI developers, and vulnerable groups of people, were underrepresented in the current body of evidence. And we didn't come across any universally accepted comprehensive framework for ethical AI development and implementation of it in healthcare. Based on this review, we have some recommendations for future research. One is the development of practical tools to test adherence to upholding ethical principles during the whole life cycle of AI technology. Ethics guideline for trustworthy AI suggests a checklist with 7 key requirements for trustworthy AI. However, we didn't come across any data showing the actual implementation of the checklist by AI developers. Further research is needed to identify different stakeholders and users and beneficiaries, and also to engage with them in a discussion about AI. Since their opinions might be very much different than the other parties involved. Interdisciplinary collaboration between different stakeholders, regulatory and legislative authorities is needed to ensure ethical AI, to ensure transparency in implementation, and to build up a best and sound government model for supporting the application of AI and ethical frameworks. And we have to pay due consideration for public health and global health implications, as it is needed in terms of research priorities and to address equity and diversity challenge. And at the end, I would like to thank my co-authors and mentors during this work, Dr. Petalos and Professor Evers, both from the University of Maastricht, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Governor. I don't know how you managed to keep on time, but you did. So very, very quickly, we have only 9 minutes left. We have 2 quite interesting questions. The first one is a comment, and a question is from Louis Jacques. Louis, I don't know if you want to unmute or if you prefer me to read it. If you want to unmute, please do. Otherwise, I will read it. Okay.
I've unmuted myself here. Sorry.
Please go ahead, because you had the comment about examining devices and algorithms, which was additionally to evaluating the device. So please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, AI doesn't exist as sort of a standalone entity for which a payer could make payment. And arguably, it's just an improvement over the software that already exists within EKG machines, CAT scanners, and everything else, because the raw output of those machines would be unintelligible. So realizing that there are probably 2 different questions here, one being, how could AI be applied broadly in a health plan or care system? The other being, if you're and what I'm focusing on is, if you're evaluating an AI-assisted technology, is it that much different than For example, evaluating technologies now, if it's, for example, a cardiogram, you could look at patient outcomes with AI-assisted cardiographs versus non-AI assisted cardiographs, and simply make a decision based on those outcomes, whether the AI was worth any additional, reward, motivation, or anything like that. So at least from my perspective, the questions I always get are not broad, high-level AI questions. It's literally, will the United States Medicare pay me more for this PET scan or nuclear or whatever that happens to have an AI-assisted technology that the AI developer wants to get paid an extraordinary amount of additional money for?
So, Puya, do you want to go first?
Sure. Actually, I need to clarify something. Maybe it was good to say at the beginning. Thank you very much for your question. That is the first question. It's clarify many things. About AI, we have two kind of AI. Either it's embedded in a device or it's used as an algorithm in the computer, right? So, but what we did, we just focused on those algorithms that were used in the computer to analyze and to measure outcomes, health outcomes. So it's a little bit different from those AI embedded technologies.
Okay, thank you. Because at least in my context, AI is considered an adjunct to physician cognitive work. So in the same way that an insurer won't pay a physician more to consult a textbook in the old days or to Google something currently, there would also be a resistance to paying additionally for the physician using an AI-assisted algorithm in a computer to then manage the patient. Okay, thank you. That's clarifying.
There's yes,
sorry, sorry, Elena. Thank you. And maybe a session at Valley ML that is going to be held next month in October. The healthcare section is on 12th on October 12th. And maybe that session might be very helpful for clarifying or getting the answer of many of these kinds of questions. Actually, I'm going to present something there that is AI in health technology assessment. That's again another aspect of using AI in our health system. So you're more than welcome if you are interested to.
But I don't think anybody can contain details like that. So feel free to add the details of the event in the chat. I don't think it's a question of advertisement. I mean, it's if somebody's interested, they should be able to join. So please add them.
Sure.
Louis, just to say, I will pass the ball to Goran, but just to say for software as medical device, yes and no, because everybody is constrained by their perspective. So AI is actually being used even by international organizations for many different things that we're not necessarily HTAing now at the moment, and they're not software as a medical device or software embedded in a medical device. So it's a big discussion. I'll pass the ball, and we probably circle back to this in capturing what we did in the workshop, although we're still capturing the one we did in RWE. But Goran, perhaps you want to comment on this before we go to the next one? Quickly.
I was going to say that for example, an insurance company to be able to justify paying more or for the pay for AI assisted an ECG, it is necessary to be shown that it is added some value, extra value to the clinical care of the patient, because in the end, the insurance and the whole healthcare body wants to have added value for the money they pay. So it is a little bit different than with Google and the textbooks. If AI now is being used and is also researched in to show clinical effectiveness, then it may be easier to convince the insurer to pay for it.
Okay. Thanks, Golnar. Going to the second question from Anke Peggy. Anke Peggy, I don't know if you want to unmute or if you want me to read.
I can unmute if you hear me.
Yes, and it's much better to have a proper meeting than us.
Sure. Thank you very much. So the background of my question is that I'm currently doing a work with a work group from the Patient and Citizen Involvement Group, where it's about the use of social media for social media research to understand better the patient experiences and needs and so on. And one of the methods which is applied there is AI to analyze all this kind of like communication between patients in the internet. So my question was, Golna, and I think it's mostly to you, did you include in your analysis the ethical aspects of using AI for generating data for HTA for decision making, basically? One example, which is where there's a lot about it, is using AI to identify adverse events which haven't been known before in the communication of patients in social media.
We didn't look for the grade literature, but one article that we came across had used AI for generating research data, and that was also approaching patients group. That is the article with the patients in with meningioma and their caregivers, in which their approach was for the how AI is used to generate data. So maybe that was in line with the kind of research you have been doing, but we did not indeed look at the grey literature or social media or the approach of AI, the use of AI in analyzing data generation.
Yeah, because there is an additional dimension of complexity in the ethical.
Having said that, I don't know, because we have, I mean, we weren't planning to announce this now. We are looking at how international organizations are using social whispering and social listening in the context of preparedness to combat misinformation, so broader civil techniques. That's why I mentioned to Louis before that it's not only devices, there are other things that are being used. But having said that, to Golnar's point, the trouble is evidence-based searching, because for this type of research, you will not necessarily find something in PubMed or in IEEE, particularly in the context that we have seen with COVID. So there's lots of things coming up. So this is the other dimension. The first one is that we did not exclude for this kind of thing. I mean, we included everything in the paper that Golnar mentioned was, I think, one of the most ones we discussed. The second thing is that we're seeing different kind of utilization of these techniques for behavioral monitoring and behavioral insights and indeed modification. You mentioned a more concrete circumscribed example with adverse events, but we're seeing other things that will need to be HTA. So if you bear with us for a few more weeks, maybe we can, I mean, Golnar is expecting an email on this tomorrow, so you are a little bit ahead of us, if you like. So maybe we reach out, because we were going to go with the citizen's perspective broader, but not with the patients, but perhaps we should do both.
Actually, we do both. So maybe we should definitely connect on this, because we are fairly, I mean, there is a specific plan behind it. And I'm happy to show to send you the information on that, what we are doing. And it's a group of people, it's HTA people, it's patient representatives and some people from industry and some others like myself. Who try to develop something like a white paper on approach and potentially pilot something in this direction for HTA.
If I remember correctly, Anke Peggy, if I remember correctly, we started discussing this just before Corona in Brussels at the APF. I could be wrong, but I think
it could be.
Presenting, and we were presenting with Dimitra, but we'll circle back immediately, because this is a request coming from an international organization. So we'll come back to you immediately, because we need to look into this. So thank
absolutely,
you.
yeah, reach out. That would be great. And actually we are really hoping to complete our white paper by mid-October or something.
Thank you. Thanks very much. One more question from Aline Tupu. I'm sorry, is it Tupukian or Tupuchian? I think it's Tupuchian.
Tupuchian, yes.
Thank you.
Well, actually, it links back a little bit to what was said previously, because I come from the medical device industry, so and I'm following, and we can see all these HTA frameworks to assess devices or technologies that are connected or where we have an artificial intelligence or software or associated to the device. So I was wondering, is there any difference across the different methods, AI methods? So are all methods equally eligible to go through an HTA assessment?
Puya first. You are on mute. The words most heard in 2020 and 2021.
Could you please repeat your sentence? Sorry.
Yeah, so are all the AI methods that you showed also in your presentation, are those equally eligible to go through an HTA? So in the situation where they are associated to a device, so we're not talking about the algorithms, standalone algorithms.
Actually, it was in the scope of our project was talking about or evaluating and analyzing the information about algorithms that was used as AI tool for outcomes research evaluation. So when you're talking about device, it wasn't kind of, the focus of our study was not about different devices with AI technology.
Yeah. But having your knowledge and you're probably much more familiar than I am with these different methods, do you think that's something realistic to assess in the same way all the methods, AI methods, and have them assessed through an HTA with the same framework, with the same way?
Are you going to answer? Or are you asking me?
Yeah, yes.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry, I thought you were asking Elena or Golnar.
Whomever is able to answer, so it's not.
I think go first, Puya. I'm just moderating.
Okay, sorry, sure. You're asking about if we, sorry, once again, because I was distracted again with some noise here. Could you please repeat your question? My apology.
No. So my question is, are all AI methods, so independently from the research and which I understand it was not the focus, having your knowledge and your understanding of the AI methods and the different methods, do you think all the methods are in the same way eligible to go through an HTA? So applying, we are seeing in some countries, the authorities are working on some frameworks to assess the devices, connected devices, but can we assess with these types of frameworks equally all AI methods? That's the question.
Actually, I think we need, to be honest, it's a broad area. And it's a very broad area, and we need to be specific about the type of devices. Sometimes even we have to be specific on the medical area or medical field that we are talking about. And more important than that, I think we need some standardization to clarify which specific type of device we are talking about. Like, for example, imagine robotics. They are going to be approved by HTA bodies, for example, for hospitals. And sorry, some countries, but in some other countries, it's approved at in a hospital. So by HTA body at the hospital. So when we are talking about kind of medical device, we need to specify which kind of device. Robotics are really different. I mean, the requirements for HTA of robotics is very different. It's very different from the requirements for wearables HTA. HTA of wearables.
Yes.
Wearables devices which have AI already. And as Golnar said, the privacy of those data is very, very important and very different from one area to another one, to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I personally think that in an ideal world, all the AI new technologies should also go through an HTA, because HTA would give a tool to us to compare different technologies with each other and see which one we are actually going to pay for in the end in the healthcare, in the increasingly expensive healthcare that we have these days. However, based on the research that we did recently, a comprehensive framework is still missing. So it is, of course, it is needed, but it's still very difficult to bring all the AI new technology in for an HTA evaluation. But hopefully, in the coming years, these tools will be developed.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay, we keep the questions for follow-up. Thanks for sticking around for 10 extra minutes. Dimitra or Masood, if you have any comments before we wrap up.
No, just wanted to thank our speakers and you as the organizer of this session today, and also the participants. We learned a lot, and also suggest that for any other questions, you reach out to us, and we will relay the messages to the speakers, or just reach out to the speakers directly.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.